Mira Novak had always believed that physics wasn't about memorizing equations, it was about understanding the universe's sense of humor. Unfortunately, Professor Roland Thornton didn't share her philosophy, which explained why she was currently staring at a quantum physics quiz that might as well have been written in ancient Martian. "You have 45 minutes, announced Professor Thornton, his voice carrying the emotional range of a calculator. "And remember, partial credit requires showing your work." He adjusted his perfectly symmetrical bow tie and gazed upon his students with all the warmth of liquid nitrogen. The Galileo Institute for Advanced Sciences wasn't just prestigious, it was pretentious about being prestigious. The kind of place where the bathrooms had blackboards so students could solve differential equations while handling other pressing matters. The campus architecture screamed, "We're smarter than you," with its modernist glass buildings shaped like various mathematical constants. Mira was pretty sure the administrative building was a giant pi symbol when viewed from above. Mira glanced around at her classmates, all hunched over their papers like medieval monks transcribing sacred texts. Elliott Prescott, the human embodiment of a physics textbook with legs, was already on the second page, his pencil moving with robotic precision. She returned to her own quiz and read the first question again. Describe the quantum tunneling process using both Schrödinger's wave equation and Heisenberg's matrix mechanics, accounting for relativistic corrections near event horizons. "Well, that's just mean," Mira muttered. 2 rows ahead, someone let out a whimper. Mira sympathized. Professor Thornton didn't give quizzes, he inflicted psychological warfare disguised as academic assessment. By minute 15, Mira had doodled what she considered a rather artistic representation of Schrödinger's cat, both alive and dead. By minute 30, she had derived her own theory that perhaps the universe operated on sarcasm rather than string theory. By minute 40, she had written answers that were less about quantum physics and more about questioning why physics had to be so unreasonably complex when the universe clearly operated on principles that humans were too stubborn to accept. When Professor Thornton collected her paper, he gave it the kind of look usually reserved for discovering mold in expensive cheese. "Ms. Novak," he said, scanning her work with increasingly raised eyebrows, "I asked for the relativistic corrections near event horizons, not a philosophical treatise on why." He squinted at her paper, and I quote, "Black holes are cosmic dumpsters where the universe hides the evidence of its physics elements gone wrong." "It's a metaphor, Professor," Mira replied. "I'm approaching quantum tunneling from a conceptual perspective rather than a purely mathematical one. Science is not metaphors, Ms. Novak. It's precision. Equations. Provable theories. But all our equations are just approximations of reality, aren't they? Mathematical metaphors for what we observe." The class went silent. Challenging Professor Thornton was like poking a hibernating bear with a stick labeled tenure review. "Your perspective," he said with glacial calm, "would be fascinating in a philosophy class. However, this is advanced quantum physics." He placed her quiz on top of the stack with 2 fingers, as if it might contaminate the others. "See me after class." As her classmates filed out 45 minutes later, Mira approached the podium, mentally preparing for academic execution. "Ms. Novak," Professor Thornton said, removing his glasses dramatically. "You possess one of the most creative minds I've encountered in 30 years of teaching. Unfortunately, creativity without discipline is chaos. But Professor..." "Let me finish. Your intuitive understanding of physics concepts is remarkable, but physics isn't interpretive dance, it's precision. Structure. Math." He tapped her quiz. "This is your 3rd failed assessment this term. At this rate, your scholarship will be in jeopardy." Mira felt her stomach tighten. That scholarship was the only reason she could attend Galileo in the first place. "I understand the material, Professor. I just see it differently." "Different isn't always correct, Ms. Novak. Einstein didn't just feel relativity was right, he proved it. With math." Professor Thornton sighed. "The university lab is open until midnight. I suggest you spend some time there reviewing the standard models instead of reinventing them." As Mira left the classroom, she mumbled, "Standard models. Right. Because the universe totally fills out standardized forms when creating new particles. What Professor Thornton didn't understand was that Mira wasn't trying to reinvent physics, she was trying to listen to what the universe was actually saying, rather than forcing it to speak a language humans had invented. Sometimes she felt like everyone else was studying a translation while she was trying to learn the original text. Her phone buzzed with a message from her roommate. "Quiz genocide again?" Mira texted back, "Total massacre. But don't worry, my academic career is only mostly dead. I'll see you in the lab later." Because that's where Mira always went when conventional physics failed her. To the lab, where the universe sometimes whispered its secrets if you were paying attention, and if you were willing to break a few institutional rules about proper experimental protocol. At 10:37 p.m., the Galileo Institute's Advanced Quantum Research Laboratory was technically still open, but practically deserted. Most students were either studying in the library, drinking away quiz-induced trauma at the campus pub, or trying to salvage their sleep schedules. This made it the perfect time for Mira to work on what her academic advisor had diplomatically called her alternative hypotheses. What he meant was your crackpot theories that would get you laughed out of a freshman physics seminar. Mira slipped her student ID through the card reader and entered the lab, flipping on only the necessary lights. The less attention she drew, the better. She'd learned that lesson the hard way after the spontaneous plasma formation incident last semester. Technically, she had discovered a new way to ionize gas using sound waves. Practically, she had set off every fire alarm in the building and earned a 2-week lab suspension. Working late again, Novak? Mira nearly dropped her notebook. Dexter Kim, the graduate student who managed the lab equipment, emerged from behind a server rack. His lab coat was rumpled, and his physics puns a relatively funny t-shirt was visible underneath. "Dexter, I thought I was alone. You usually are at this hour. That's why I noticed." He pushed his glasses up. "What's the experiment tonight? More quantum entanglement communication? Or are we trying to prove that time flows backwards on Thursdays?" Despite his teasing, Dexter was the closest thing Mira had to an ally in the department. While others dismissed her theories, he at least listened before pointing out why they would probably violate 3 laws of thermodynamics. "Very funny. Actually, I'm working on localized field manipulation." Mira began unpacking her bag. "Professor Thornton failed me on another quiz today, so I'm trying to prove my point about quantum field interactions." "Ah, the quantum fields have personalities theory." "They don't have personalities," Mira corrected. "They have tendencies. Preferences. Like how electrons don't just follow the path of least resistance, they explore possibilities before deciding." Dexter leaned against a workbench. "And this theory helps you pass classes how exactly?" "It doesn't. But it might help me change how we understand fundamental forces." Mira connected her laptop to the lab's quantum field detector. "I think gravity isn't a constant force, it's a conversation between mass and spacetime. And sometimes, if you ask nicely, it might consider taking a break." "Ask gravity to take a break," Dexter repeated slowly. "With what? A formal letter?" Mira grinned. "No, with this." She held up a device she'd constructed from parts that wouldn't be missed from the electronics lab, a small array of quantum oscillators surrounding a modified electromagnetic pulse generator. "That looks suspiciously like something that would violate lab safety protocols." "Only if it doesn't work," Mira countered. "If it works, it's a revolutionary scientific instrument." "That logic is precisely why Professor Thornton keeps failing you." Mira positioned her device on the workbench and connected it to her laptop. "Just log this as an approved field stability test. I'll clean everything up before morning." Dexter sighed dramatically but moved to help her set up. "One day your crazy ideas are going to either win you a Nobel Prize or get us both expelled. I'm betting on the latter." "Such faith," Mira said, typing commands into her program. "Can you hand me that quantum field resonator?" "The thing that looks like a mini satellite dish with LED lights." "That's the one." For the next hour, they calibrated equipment that was definitely not being used according to manufacturer specifications. Mira's theory was simple. Even if her execution was complicated, If gravity was a field that permeated spacetime, then it should be possible to create a counterfield that temporarily neutralized it in a small area. Okay, Mira finally said, fingers hovering over her keyboard. Stand back. This might get interesting. Your definition of interesting terrifies me, Dexter replied. But he stepped back anyway. Mira activated the sequence. Her device hummed to life, the quantum oscillators vibrating at frequencies that made Dexter's teeth feel strange. The resonator began emitting a soft blue glow that rippled like water. Is it supposed to do that? Dexter asked nervously. No idea, Mira admitted. But it's not exploding, so we're already exceeding expectations. The humming intensified, and the blue light began to form a dome shape above the device. Mira watched her laptop screen as data poured in. This is incredible, she exclaimed. Look at these readings. The quantum field is actually reshaping around the energy pattern. Mira, Dexter said, his voice unusually high. Something's happening. A pencil on the workbench began to wobble, then slowly rose into the air. Then a clipboard followed. Then Dexter's coffee mug, spilling its contents in a suspended, globular form. Are you seeing this? Mira whispered, watching as more objects around the device began to float upward. I'm seeing it. I'm really hoping you're doing it on purpose, Dexter replied, grabbing onto the edge of a lab table as his feet began to leave the floor. It's working, Mira shouted, her excitement overriding caution. We've created a localized anti-gravity field. Great. Now turn it off, Dexter yelled, now floating completely horizontal about 3 feet above the ground. But Mira was too entranced by the data streaming across her screen to immediately comply. The field was expanding, strengthening. Lab equipment was rising toward the ceiling, delicate instruments, expensive analyzers, and even the small refrigerator used to store samples. Mira. Off. Finally registering the urgency, Mira reached for her laptop, which chose that exact moment to float away from her grasp. Oh, crap, she muttered, pushing off from the workbench and swimming through air toward her computer. With a desperate lunge, she caught it and managed to terminate the program. The blue glow faded. The humming stopped, and everything that had been floating suddenly remembered that gravity existed. The cacophony of crashing equipment sounded like an orchestra of expensive destruction. Beakers shattered. Electronic devices smashed. The sample refrigerator landed with a crunch that made both of them wince. As silence returned to the lab, Mira and Dexter surveyed the chaos around them. So, Dexter said eventually, picking glass out of his hair, it worked. And Mira looked at the devastation, then back at her device, somehow undamaged amid the wreckage. A smile slowly spread across her face. It worked, she agreed. I just temporarily cancelled gravity. And temporarily cancelled my career prospects, Dexter added, staring at the destroyed lab. Professor Thornton is going to kill us, then expel us, then reanimate us just to kill us again. Mira was already checking her data. Not if we clean this up. And not if we figure out how to control it. Control it? You couldn't even turn it off without smashing half the lab. Details. Mira waved dismissively. We just made the biggest physics discovery since the Higgs boson, and you're worried about a few broken test tubes. A few. Dexter gestured wildly at the destruction. This is at least $30,000 in equipment. Think bigger, Dex. We just bent the rules of gravity. This changes, well, everything. As they argued among the ruins of the lab, neither noticed that Mira's device was still emitting a faint blue pulse every few minutes. Nor did they notice the small metal paperclip that would occasionally twitch and rise a centimeter off the ground before falling back down. The effect wasn't gone. It was just getting started. Esther, Mira hissed, tossing Dexter another roll of paper towels. It's almost 5 a.m., and the early researchers start arriving at 5:30. They had spent the night attempting to restore the lab to something resembling its previous state, or at least to a state where it wasn't immediately obvious that someone had temporarily cancelled gravity. Broken glass had been swept up, equipment had been repositioned, or hidden in storage closets if too damaged, and spilled chemicals had been neutralized according to safety protocols that Mira was suddenly very glad Dexter had memorized. "This is like trying to hide a hurricane hit the room," Dexter grumbled, wiping blue residue from a workbench. "What even is this stuff?" "Quantum field residue, I think," Mira replied, examining the smear on the paper towel. "It's probably just visible light refracting through locally distorted spacetime." "Oh, sure, just that. No big deal." Mira's device, which she had now named G.R.A.C.E, gravity reduction and counter effect, was safely stowed in her backpack. The data had been downloaded to her encrypted drive. All evidence of their unauthorized experiment was nearly eliminated. "There," Mira said, disposing of the last cleaning supplies. "Not perfect, but plausible deniability established." Dexter collapsed into a chair. "Next time you decide to violate fundamental forces, maybe give me advance notice so I can call in sick." The lab door swung open, and they both jumped. Well, the dynamic duo burns the midnight oil again. Elliott Prescott stood in the doorway, immaculately dressed despite the early hour, his posture so perfect it made Mira's spine hurt just looking at him. Elliott was everything the Galileo Institute idealized: methodical, conventional, and insufferably correct about everything. He was also Professor Thornton's research assistant and Mira's chief academic nemesis. "Morning, Elliott," Mira said, trying to sound casual while using her body to block a conspicuous crack in one of the workstations. "Early start today?" Elliott's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the lab. "Always. Excellence doesn't sleep in." He sniffed the air. "What's that smell? Ozone? Have you been using the high-energy apparatus?" "Just cleaning," Dexter interjected. "Spilled some solutions earlier, all properly disposed of." Elliott set his perfectly organized notebook on a table. "Interesting. I don't recall authorizing any overnight experiments in this lab space." "Didn't realize we needed your permission," Mira replied. "Last I checked, your name wasn't on the building." "No, but it is on the lab schedule. As Professor Thornton's assistant, I help maintain the schedule." "Yes, we know," Mira interrupted. "We were just finishing up." "The lab's all yours, Your Majesty." As they gathered their belongings, Elliott walked around, inspecting surfaces and equipment with the scrutiny of a health inspector at a sketchy restaurant. "What happened here?" he asked, pointing to a scorch mark they had missed. "Coffee spill," Mira said quickly. "On the ceiling?" Dexter coughed. "It was a very enthusiastic coffee spill." Elliott traced his finger along the workbench where the device had been placed. It came away with a faint blue residue. He rubbed it between his fingers, frowning. "You know," he said slowly, "Professor Thornton mentioned your unorthodox theories, Novak, something about gravity being negotiable." Mira's stomach tightened. "I believe all physical forces have flexible properties under the right conditions." "Flexibility implies rules," Elliott countered. "Not whatever chaos theory you're pursuing." He looked pointedly at the blue residue on his finger. "I hope you're not conducting unauthorized experiments. That would be grounds for academic review." "We were studying," Mira insisted. "Theoretical applications only." Elliott smiled thinly. "Of course. By the way, Professor Thornton asked me to remind everyone about the special project assignment being announced today. Teams will be selected by faculty. I believe you're on the roster. Novak, try not to drag down whoever gets paired with you." After Elliott moved to the other side of the lab, Mira and Dexter made their hasty exit. "He knows something," Dexter whispered as they hurried down the corridor. "He suspects, which isn't the same thing," Mira replied, "and without proof, he's just being his usual suspicious self." Back in Mira's dorm room, they examined G.R.A.C.E more carefully. The device occasionally pulsed with that same blue light, even though it was powered down. "That's not supposed to happen," Dexter pointed out unnecessarily. Mira ran a diagnostic scan. The quantum oscillators seem to have established a self-sustaining resonance pattern. "It's like they've remembered the frequency that affects gravity." "Is that dangerous?" "I don't know," Mira admitted. This is entirely new territory. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Mandatory department meeting, 10 a.m., Lecture Hall C. Special project assignments. Great, she muttered. Now I get to find out which poor soul gets stuck with me as their academic anchor. At least you'll be too busy with the official project to cause more quantum disasters, Dexter said hopefully. Mira glanced at G.R.A.C.E., still pulsing gently in her bag. Yeah, she said, not believing it for a second. That's definitely how this will go. 3 hours later, showered and marginally more awake, Mira slipped into Lecture Hall C just as Professor Thornton began speaking. The hall was arranged in a semicircle, with tiered seating facing a central presentation area designed, like everything at Galileo, to maximize the professor's ability to pinpoint and embarrass unprepared students. The annual Innovation Challenge is the Galileo Institute's most prestigious undergraduate research competition, Professor Thornton announced. Teams will develop and demonstrate a viable physics application with real-world potential. The winning team receives research funding and a feature in Scientific American. Murmurs of excitement rippled through the hall. This was career-making stuff. Teams have been pre-selected based on complementary skills and academic standing, he continued, pulling up a list on the projection screen. Mira scanned for her name, then froze. Team 7. Elliott Prescott, Mira Novak, Dexter Kim, grad advisor. She exchanged a horrified glance with Dexter, who looked equally stunned from his position at the back of the hall. This can't be happening, she whispered. And from across the room, Elliott caught her eye and smirked. It was the smirk of someone who'd just been handed a front-row seat to what he anticipated would be a spectacular academic failure. Professor Thornton continued, your project proposals are due Friday. Each team will have dedicated lab time and resources. As the meeting concluded, Elliott approached Mira with the confident stride of someone who had never doubted his intellectual superiority for a single moment in his life. Well, partner, he said, I hope you're prepared to actually follow scientific methodology for once. I've already outlined 3 viable project options that should be accessible even to your creative mind. Can't wait, Mira replied through gritted teeth. As Elliott walked away, Dexter joined her. Of all the people, Mira groaned. Why him? Maybe Professor Thornton is trying to balance Elliott's rigidity with your chaos. Or he's trying to ensure I fail spectacularly while giving Elliott front-row seats. As they left the lecture hall, Mira's backpack suddenly felt lighter. She glanced down to see it hovering slightly above her back. Mira. Dexter pointed nervously. She quickly adjusted the straps, forcing the bag back against her body. We need to contain this effect. Now, before Elliott notices your backpack floating away. And what? Yeah, that would be ideal. What neither of them realized was that the anti-gravity effect was no longer confined to G.R.A.C.E. itself. It had begun to propagate, seeking equilibrium like water flowing downhill. The laws of physics were about to get very flexible in the Galileo Institute, and Mira's academic problems were about to become much bigger than a failed quiz. It's spreading, Mira whispered, staring at her laptop screen. Look at these readings. 3 days had passed since the lab incident, and Mira and Dexter had converted her dorm room into an impromptu research center. Equations covered whiteboards, data charts plastered the walls, and G.R.A.C.E. sat in a makeshift containment box in the center of it all. The anti-gravity effect has a propagation radius now, Dexter confirmed, adjusting his glasses to study the data. It's like the device imprinted the effect on the quantum field itself, and now that field is expanding. It's beautiful, Mira said. The universe didn't just answer my question, it gave me a whole new conversation. It's terrifying is what it is, Dexter corrected. We've created a persistent anomaly in a fundamental force, and we have no idea how to stop it. The incidents had been small so far, objects momentarily floating in the physics building, strange readings from the lab equipment, a freshman's physics textbook hovering above his desk for nearly 2 minutes before he noticed. Each event was brief enough to be dismissed as imagination or fatigue-induced hallucination. But Mira and Dexter knew better. "We need to understand it to control it," Mira insisted, adjusting sensors around G.R.A.C.E, and honestly, this is the most exciting physics breakthrough in decades. We should be celebrating. Celebrating? "Mira, we've potentially destabilized gravity in a localized area. That's not an achievement, it's an emerging disaster." Mira waved away his concern. "The effect is temporary and mild. It's like gravity gets confused for a few moments, then remembers how to do its job. Until it doesn't," Dexter muttered. A knock at the door made them both jump. "TJ. Yeah, tell lied." Mira hastily threw a blanket over G.R.A.C.E and their equipment. "Who is it?" she called. "Your academically superior project partner," came Elliott's irritatingly precise voice. Mira and Dexter exchanged panicked looks before Mira opened the door just enough to peer out. "Elliott." "What a surprise!" Elliott stood in the hallway, a tablet in hand and disapproval radiating from every perfectly groomed hair on his head. "We have a project meeting scheduled. Now. As I mentioned in the 3 emails you apparently didn't read." "Right. The project. I was just brainstorming. In your dorm room. With Kim?" Elliott tried to look past her. "The lab has actual equipment, you know." "Sometimes creativity needs a different environment," Mira said, blocking his view. Elliott's eyes narrowed. "You've been avoiding the lab since that morning I found you there. Any particular reason?" "Oh man. It's just been busy." With what exactly?" "Because it certainly hasn't been our project proposal, which is due tomorrow." Dexter appeared beside Mira. "We were actually discussing some theoretical approaches that might work for the innovation challenge." Elliott snorted. "Let me guess, more of Novak's gravity is just a suggestion nonsense." Behind them, under the blanket, G.R.A.C.E pulsed. A textbook on Mira's desk rose 3 inches before Dexter casually placed his hand on it, forcing it back down. "We should go to the library," Mira said quickly. "More room to spread out our ideas." "Fine," Elliott agreed reluctantly. "But I've already completed initial proposals for 3 viable projects." He held up his tablet. "Precision molecular assembly, quantum computational architecture, or advanced particle detection systems. All with established methodologies and realistic outcomes." As they walked toward the library, Mira exchanged a worried glance with Dexter. They needed to solve the G.R.A.C.E problem, not waste time on Elliott's conventional projects. "Actually," Mira said suddenly, "what about gravity modification?" Elliott nearly tripped. "Excuse me?" "Theoretical gravity manipulation for practical applications. Imagine controlled anti-gravity for construction, space travel, or medical treatments." "That's science fiction, not science," Elliott dismissed. "There's no established methodology for altering gravitational constants in localized environments." Mira bit her tongue to keep from blurting out that she'd already done exactly that. "What if there was?" Dexter suggested cautiously. "Hypothetically?" Elliott stopped walking. "Is this what you two have been working on? Some crackpot gravity experiment?" "DA." Before Mira could respond, a commotion erupted from a nearby classroom. Students poured out, laughing and pointing inside. The 3 of them approached to find a classroom where everything smaller than a desk was floating gently toward the ceiling. "What in the world?" Elliott whispered. Mira's heart raced. The effect was spreading faster than she'd calculated. A deep voice behind them cut through the chaos. Fascinating phenomenon. They turned to find a tall man in a crisp military uniform observing the floating pencils and notebooks. His nameplate read Colonel Reeves, and his posture suggested he was accustomed to being the most important person in any room. "Colonel Victor Reeves, Department of Defense Advanced Research," he introduced himself. "I'm here for the Innovation Challenge Oversight Committee." His eyes fixed on the floating objects. "And suddenly I'm very interested in what's happening at this institute." Professor Thornton appeared, looking flustered as he tried to explain away the anomaly to bewildered students. When he spotted Colonel Reeves observing the scene, his expression shifted from confused to alarmed. "Colonel, I see you've arrived early for our meeting." "Fortuitous timing," Reeves replied, his eyes never leaving the floating objects. "I'm particularly interested in applications that defy conventional limitations." He turned to Mira and her companions. "Students, I presume?" "Yes, sir," Elliott responded instantly. "Distain." Elliott Prescott, top of the quantum physics program. "Mira Novak," Mira added, feeling Dexter tense beside her. "We're actually working on a project proposal involving theoretical gravity manipulation." Colonel Reeves's eyebrow arched. "Are you now? What a remarkable coincidence." There was nothing coincidental in the way he studied her, and Mira suddenly realized they might have a bigger problem than floating school supplies. The military implications of controlled gravity manipulation weren't lost on her or apparently on Colonel Reeves. "Perhaps I'll be sitting in on your presentation," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The DoD is always looking for innovative approaches." As the colonel walked away with a flustered Professor Thornton, Elliott rounded on Mira. "Gravity manipulation. Really? Is that what you were doing in the lab that night?" His voice dropped to an accusatory whisper. "Did you cause this?" "Of course not," Mira lied. "But we should definitely investigate it for our project." "Investigate? This is clearly some kind of prank or malfunction. Or mass hallucination. Or," Mira suggested, "it's the most important physics discovery of our time happening right in front of us. Imagine being the first team to document and explain it." Elliott's expression shifted from dismissive to calculating. Academic ambition was a language he understood fluently. If this phenomenon is real and reproducible," he said slowly, "documenting it properly would be significant." "Exactly. And if we could theoretically control it," Mira pressed, "we'd win the innovation challenge." And Colonel Reeves's attention. Elliott's eyes gleamed with sudden interest. "Fine. We'll investigate this. But we follow proper scientific protocols. No more of your chaotic, let's see what happens approach." As they left to begin their official investigation, Dexter pulled Mira aside. "Are you insane?" he hissed. "You just invited the military and Elliott to examine the unauthorized reality-breaking experiment we've been hiding." "I know," Mira replied. "But now we have resources, lab access, and official permission to study it. We can solve this properly. Or create an even bigger disaster with even more witnesses." Mira watched as G.R.A.C.E's effect continued to spread through the classroom, the blue pulse now visible to the naked eye. "We need to understand what we've created," she said quietly, "and before someone else does." What she didn't say was the thought that had been growing in her mind since the accident, that perhaps her failure on Professor Thornton's quantum physics quiz had been the best thing that could have happened to modern science. Sometimes being wrong in the right way was more valuable than being correctly conventional. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. The Galileo Institute's Maxwell Auditorium was packed for the Innovation Challenge presentations. Faculty, students, industry representatives, and most notably Colonel Reeves and his military colleagues occupied the front row, their presence adding a weight of expectation that had teams nervously adjusting their demonstrations backstage. Mira paced behind the curtain, periodically checking the containment case holding G.R.A.C.E. The device had been modified over the past week with stabilization components that theoretically would allow for controlled, limited anti-gravity effects. The blue pulses had been dampened but not eliminated, a compromise between Elliott's insistence on safety and Mira's determination to demonstrate the discovery. "Stop fidgeting," Elliott hissed, making final adjustments to their presentation slides. "You're making me nervous." "I'm making you nervous. You're not the one about to demonstrate a physics-defying device we barely understand in front of the entire scientific department and the military." "Because that would be reckless," Elliott replied. "We're demonstrating a prototype with limited capabilities under controlled conditions. The full explanation of the theory is in the paper." Dexter joined them, looking pale. "The anti-gravity incidents have increased across campus. reports just this morning. We need to end this presentation quickly and get G.R.A.C.E. into proper containment. They had documented 17 spontaneous anti-gravity events in the past week. Small objects floating, momentary weightlessness on staircases, and one particularly memorable incident involving the cafeteria's soup of the day achieving brief flight. The effect was growing, spreading like ripples in a pond. Stick to the plan, Elliott insisted. Limited demonstration, theoretical framework, potential applications. Then we contain it properly in the high-security lab. Professor Thornton appeared backstage. Team 7, you're up after the current presentation. And may I remind you that actual working prototypes score significantly higher than theoretical models. He gave Mira a pointed look. I expect science, not science fiction, Ms. Novak. You'll get more than you expect, Professor, Mira promised. Thornton frowned. That's precisely what concerns me. As the professor left, Dexter checked their equipment one last time. Remember, low power only. We just need to float a pencil for a few seconds, not recreate the lab disaster. On stage, Team 6 was concluding their presentation on quantum entanglement communication. Polite applause followed as they exited, looking relieved to be finished. And now, announced the department chair, Team 7 with their project, Gravitational Field Manipulation, Theory and Limited Application. Elliott led the way onto the stage, the perfect picture of academic confidence. Dexter followed with their equipment cart. Mira brought up the rear, carrying G.R.A.C.E. in its containment case and fighting the urge to run in the opposite direction. The stage lights were blinding, but Mira could make out Colonel Reeves leaning forward with interest as Elliott began their presentation. Distinguished faculty, honored guests, fellow students. Our team has been investigating an unusual phenomenon observed recently on campus: temporary localized disruptions in gravitational consistency. Elliott clicked through slides showing their data, carefully sanitized to obscure the fact that Mira had accidentally created the effect during an unauthorized experiment. While initially skeptical, our team documented multiple instances and developed a theoretical framework explaining how quantum field manipulation might temporarily alter gravitational constants in a controlled environment. Mira nervously checked G.R.A.C.E. The containment case was working mostly. Occasional blue pulses still escaped, but they were minor. As long as they kept the demonstration brief and controlled, everything should be fine. Dexter took over, explaining the technical aspects of their measuring equipment and data collection methodology. The audience seemed engaged but skeptical, exactly what they had expected for such an outlandish claim. Then it was Mira's turn. She stepped forward, setting the containment case carefully on the demonstration table. Theory is important, but seeing is believing, she said, voice steadier than she felt. We've created a small-scale prototype we're calling G.R.A.C.E. gravitational resonance actuator for controlled environments. Mira unlocked the containment case. A soft blue glow pulsed within, casting eerie shadows across her face. For today's demonstration, we'll show a limited application, just enough to prove our theoretical framework. She removed a small platform from the case, connected to the core device by thin filaments. This control surface will experience approximately 5 seconds of gravitational reduction. Elliott placed a pencil on the platform while Dexter monitored the readings. Colonel Reeves leaned forward, eyes narrowed with interest. Professor Thornton crossed his arms, looking decidedly unconvinced. On my mark, Mira said, adjusting the settings. 3, 2, 1. She activated G.R.A.C.E. A subdued blue pulse emerged from the device, encompassing the platform. The pencil wobbled, then rose hesitantly about 3 inches above the surface, spinning slowly in midair. Gasps rippled through the audience. Someone in the back dropped their notebook with a loud slap. As you can see, Mira continued, trying to keep her voice even despite her racing heart. The object within the field experiences a controlled reduction in gravitational force. The effect is temporary and... The pencil suddenly shot upward, slamming into the ceiling with enough force to embed its tip in the acoustic tile. Limited, Mira finished weakly. Murmurs swept through the crowd. Elliott stepped forward, clearing their throat. That was slightly more dramatic than our calculations predicted, but it demonstrates the principle effectively. Dexter was frantically checking readings. Mira, he whispered urgently, power levels are increasing autonomously. The containment field is failing. Mira moved to shut down the device, but another blue pulse stronger than before emanated from G.R.A.C.E. This time, it expanded beyond the platform. The water pitcher on the presenter's table rose abruptly, then tipped, sending liquid floating in globular spheres across the stage. Mira's notes drifted upward, pages separating and dispersing like giant confetti. Small technical issue, Elliott announced, sweat beading on their forehead. If everyone could remain calm. Another pulse, stronger still. The front row gasped as their chairs lifted slightly off the ground. Colonel Reeves gripped his armrests, eyes wide with a mixture of alarm and fascination. Shut it down now. Professor Thornton shouted, his feet leaving the floor as he clutched desperately at his seat. Mira lunged for G.R.A.C.E., but the anti-gravity field intensified around the device itself, making it untouchable. The blue pulsing had become a steady glow that expanded with each second. The emergency containment protocol. Dexter yelled, tossing Mira a lead-lined case as he floated helplessly toward the ceiling. Chairs, notes, water bottles, and increasingly panicked academics were now suspended throughout the auditorium. Someone screamed as a laptop drifted past, its owner swimming frantically through air trying to retrieve it. Mira struggled against the anti-gravity effect, using a table leg to anchor herself as she worked to position the emergency containment unit beneath G.R.A.C.E. Elliott, help me activate the magnetic lock, she called. Elliott, now plastered against the ceiling, looked down in horror. This is precisely why I said we shouldn't demonstrate. With a final effort, Mira maneuvered the case into position and slammed her palm against the emergency seal. The containment unit snapped shut around G.R.A.C.E., immediately dampening the blue glow. Gravity returned with embarrassing suddenness. People, furniture, and equipment crashed back to Earth amid shouts of pain and surprise. Water splashed across important military uniforms. Papers fluttered down like snow. In the thunderous silence that followed, Mira looked out at the chaos, the soaked military personnel, the disheveled academics, Professor Thornton's murderous glare, and the pencils still embedded in the ceiling, and managed a weak smile. As you can see, she said, there are still some calibration issues to resolve. The Innovation Challenge judges didn't even deliberate. Team 7 was immediately disqualified, their project classified as dangerous and irresponsible. Professor Thornton had personally escorted them from the auditorium, his silent fury more terrifying than any shouting could have been. Now they sat in his office, G.R.A.C.E. safely contained in a military-grade isolation box that Colonel Reeves had somehow produced within 30 minutes of the disaster. Unauthorized experimentation, reckless endangerment, property damage, potential exposure of classified research. Thornton ticked off their offenses on his fingers. Give me one reason why all three of you shouldn't be expelled immediately. Mira opened her mouth to speak, but the door swung open before she could respond. Colonel Reeves entered, followed by two stone-faced military personnel. Professor, I'll take it from here. Thornton stood. Colonel, with all due respect, this is a university matter. This became a matter of national security the moment they demonstrated gravitational manipulation. Reeves' tone left no room for argument. My team will handle the students and the device. We're not going anywhere without G.R.A.C.E., Mira said, earning warning looks from both Elliott and Dexter. The colonel studied her with newfound interest, protective of your creation. I understand. He sat on the edge of Thornton's desk. Ms. Novak, correct? The primary inventor? It was a team effort, she replied cautiously. But the core breakthrough was yours, according to your colleagues' statements. He nodded toward Elliott and Dexter, who looked away guiltily. You've created something revolutionary, if highly unstable. The Department of Defense has significant interest in your work. You want to weaponize it. Mira said flatly. Reeves smiled thinly. We want to understand it. The applications extend far beyond weapons, space travel, construction, medical technology. But yes, defense applications would be explored. We don't even fully understand how it works, Elliott interjected. The anti-gravity effect is spreading unpredictably. It's not safe. Which is precisely why it needs proper containment and study in appropriate facilities, Reeves countered. Facilities the military possesses and your university does not. Professor Thornton cleared his throat. What exactly are you proposing, Colonel? A research partnership. These three work directly with our scientists at a secure location. The university gets partial credit for the breakthrough and generous funding for related research. The students get to continue their work with proper resources and oversight. Reeves turned to Mira. And you get to keep developing your creation instead of watching it disappear into a classified facility. The threat was clear, though softly delivered. And if we refuse? Mira asked. Then we confiscate the dangerous unauthorized technology, revoke your scholarships, and you face potential criminal charges for the damage caused today. Reeves shrugged. But I'd prefer collaboration. The three students exchanged glances. Dexter looked terrified, Elliott resigned, and Mira, calculating. We'd need guarantees, she said finally, complete transparency about how our research is used, continued involvement in all aspects of development, and recognition as the primary researchers. Elliott kicked her under the table, but she ignored him. Reeves smiled, seeming genuinely impressed by her boldness. We can negotiate terms, but understand this G.R.A.C.E is leaving with me today, with or without you. Mira stood and extended her hand. Then I guess we're coming too. As they left Professor Thornton's office, escorted by military personnel, Elliott hissed, Do you realize what you've done? We're now working for the military. We're working with them, Mira corrected, and more importantly, we're still working with G.R.A.C.E, which is still dangerously unstable, Dexter reminded her. The campus anti-gravity incidents are increasing. What if we can't contain it? Mira watched as soldiers carefully loaded the containment unit into a secure transport vehicle. Then we'd better figure it out fast, she said quietly, because I think G.R.A.C.E is just getting started. In the distance, unseen by any of them, a blue pulse rippled through the physics building. For a brief moment, everything in the quantum lab floated serenely before crashing back to Earth. The effect was expanding, growing stronger with each incident. G.R.A.C.E wasn't just a device anymore. It had awakened something fundamental in the fabric of reality itself, something that couldn't be so easily contained.